Hey guys, it's Nick with the Whip Shop, and in this tutorial I'd like to show you how I made this bullwhip with a wooden handle. Long before I got into whip making, I always had an appreciation for woodworking, specifically wood turning. I recently acquired this here Craftsman lathe. This is a wood lathe. It's a little bit old, but it still works pretty well. Now, I've been well aware of whip makers such as Noah Allen, Rhett Kelly, David Crane, who are all, mind you, very well established wood turners, and they are very equipped with using a lathe. But ever since seeing those wooden handles on whips, more particularly cow whips, were kind of the first wooden handles that I ever was aware of on a whip. And then I started noticing these whip makers also attaching wooden handles onto bullwhips. So I tended to focus more on the bullwhips because bullwhips are actually my favorite types of whips. So I got this thing probably about 7 months ago. Pretty good price. Works really well, like I said, even though it's a bit older. And I just started practicing a little bit. This is poplar. It's kind of a lighter wood. You can use oak, walnut, any other type of hardwood is the better choice if you're going to be using a lathe. Now, a big misconception is that lathes are a lot of money, and I used to think that they were. But the reality is you can get a decent used lathe for about $100, maybe $150, $200. So this is a 5-foot bullwhip that I made for the Porter County Fair here in Northwest Indiana. And I turned this in. I didn't place, unfortunately, because there was a bit of tearing. I didn't keep my tools sharp enough. So there's a bit of tearing here. But this is just an example of one of the wooden handle bullwhips that I've made. Now, I'm not very experienced at all in turning. If you're unfamiliar with lathes and the terminology that goes with lathes, the act of turning means shaping cylindrical pieces of wood such as this. Now, if you look around your house, you may see spindles on chairs, legs on tables, spindles on stairways. All of those things that you see are the product of a wood lathe. And oftentimes you don't realize it, but lathes are used quite often in many household pieces of furniture. So this video is by no means a tutorial on how to use a lathe. I just got into it. This video is more so a simple means of attaching a bullwhip thong to a wooden handle. That's something I'm more specialized in. Wood turning, I am not. So please don't take this as a tutorial on Nick from Nick's Whip Shop teaches you how to use a lathe. That's absolutely not the point. I have a lot of learning to do before I'm at the level of these guys like Rhett Kelly, David Crane, who, like I said, are very well established in doing so and have been very inspiring to me to try this. So I hope you guys enjoy the tutorial. Bear with the crudeness of my turning. I'm sure a lot of you people who are watching this video are probably very well established wood turners. So if you have any, if you see anything that I'm doing wrong or anything that I could improve on, let me know. That'd be great. I would love to hear your input and constructive criticism, or just criticism if you so choose to. Now, before we get into turning one of these pieces of cylindrical wood, I'd like to just go ahead and talk about the materials that we'll be using to accomplish this. First off, I'm using, this is about a 10-inch piece of 1 3/8 poplar wood. It's not the best wood for turning. It is a hard wood, but there are better choices out there, such as walnut and the more exotic woods that you can find that are more expensive. But for the sake of this video, we're going to be using a piece of 1 3/8 poplar. So the way we're going to do this is a little bit different from other whips. Pay attention here to the handle length. This is not an exact science here. I like to, when we finally drill our hole into our handle and insert the steel rod, I like to give about 3 inches. So you could say 6 inches is good. This is actually a 7-inch piece of 1/4-inch steel rod that I'm using here, just to give myself some room for error. And start this like you would any other whip. We have underneath here is our sinker cord filled with BBs attached here, just like we do in the other ones. So here are the strand lengths that you're going to need for this whip. This is going to be a 16 plat whip with 2 plated bellies, obviously the shot loaded core. I've already prepped the core since I've done it so many times in previous videos, so if you want to know how to do that, please refer to one of my earlier videos. We're just going to jump straight into the plating here. So we have here our 4 folded strands for our first belly of this whip. If you forgot to write them down, there they are. Now if you notice here we have our 1/4" steel rod handle with the core in the clamp. This is a lot longer than it needs to be. This is about 7 inches to give myself some room for error. And I highly recommend it because later on we're going to be trimming this a little bit shorter, and it's always better to have it a little bit too long and have to trim than having to start over. So the difference between this whip and all other whips that you've seen me make on this YouTube channel is that we're going to be starting all of the bellies as well as the overlay at about halfway. So we're going to be starting here. That's about 3 inches from the transition from the steel rod to the core. And I know it sounds odd, but there's a reason for it. We're going to build up that thong right here. Later on, it'll be a little bit sloppy with the knots here that I've tied for the middles, but we're going to go down about a half an inch and cut all of them around after we bind them with artificial sinew. So we'll have a nice flat end here. Then we're going to go and cut here. Later on, we will make our handle, pre-drill a hole in the handle, fill it with glue. Then we're going to insert this steel rod in to the wooden handle, and this end here where all the bellies and the overlay start after trimming should fit nice and flush up against that wooden handle. I know I just summarized quite a lot of this tutorial, but that is going to be what we're going to accomplish in this video. So I'm going to take 2 of my first belly strands, and I'm going to go about here. I'm actually going to pull this down just a little bit here. We're going to tie them on right here. Like that. Find the ends of our other 2 strands. Feed them through. Now, don't worry, this part here, it can look pretty ratty. And that's perfectly okay because about 1 inch of this is going to be cut off. That's why I don't care that I, for convenience, have tied knots in the middles of my strands. And we're just plating an 8-plat under 2/2. So carry that on out, drop strands as you go, and I'll catch up with you. First belly of our whip here is complete. Now if you notice these big bulky knots here that I've cut to find the middles of my strands, I'm going to go ahead and lop these off after I bind a little bit here, because when I go to roll the whip here in a couple of minutes, those knots are going to keep the whip from rolling smoothly, and I don't want that. So just going to bind them. So just gonna bind that area, and I'll just give that a little bit of tape there to hold that in place, and just take care of these knots here. This is strictly for the purpose of when I go to roll my whip here in a minute, those knots won't stop it from rolling. If we left them, it'd be like using a square wheel on a car. Okay, let's roll this whip. Alright, so we have 5 more folded strands. We're just going to repeat the last step where we tied them on. Once again, don't worry about anything being bulky here because we're going to be cutting all this off in the end, so it won't matter. There we are. Make sure that those knots are resting behind. Put in our other 2 strands. Strand lengths for this belly right there. This will be a 10-plat belly. 1, 2, that's it. Now we can go ahead and plate this under 3/2, drop strands as needed, and finish this belly. I'll meet up with you. So the second belly is complete. I've cut off those indicating knots that I used to find the middles of the strands, just like I did with the previous belly, and I put some tape over there just to neaten things up. We're getting ready to roll this second belly. The whip is coming together quite well, and the overlay will be started once again right over where this belly starts. Okay, so this belly has been rolled. As you can see, I've cut and measured my strands for my overlay. Once again, here they are. And I'm going to go with maroon with a brown highlight here, which I think will complement our dark wooden handle. And we're just going to jump right into it, tying this overlay right over the start of the other bellies, the two bellies below. This is a 16 plat under 4/4. I'm going to continue this all the way down until I reach the end, and there I will tie a fall hitch and the overlay will be complete. So I'll meet you there. I just finished the overlay on this whip, completed the fall hitch, 4-point fall hitch, and I just finished rolling the whip. So now it's time to take it back over to the clamp. We're going to just dress this up a little bit. We're going to bind this area right here with some artificial sinew, and then we're going to cut a nice sharp ring around this. So we'll have a nice disc, and that disc itself is what's going to be butted up against the wooden handle. Now, to hopefully give you guys a better understanding of why we're going to be trimming the area at our transition here to where we started our overlay, I've drawn this hopefully accurate example of what we're about to do. So basically, we want this to be, this is the thong of the whip, this is obviously the steel handle here. So what we've done here, or what we will do in a second, is trim all this, and this is where the binding is going to be. So we're going to bind it first. Right now it looks like this because you got those knots there. So what we're going to do is just bind it first, and then we're just going to go all the way around with a fresh razor blade, and hopefully that top piece will pop right off. Now the steel handle itself ends about here. So I want about, it really is personal preference, but I like to have about 2 inches of the thong over the steel handle. So we'll bind right here. Now keep in mind, don't make the binding too wide. Something that I used to do when I started out binding the transition of whips, especially on multicolored handles. I would make this part too wide, so then when I went to tie my knot, my Turk's head knot for the transition, I had to end up tying a really awkward wide knot to cover up all that binding area. So you don't have to be too concerned about keeping this part tight. This artificial sinew does an absolutely fantastic job of holding parachute cord down. And that's really all the binding we're going to use here. I'm going to go ahead and snip this off here. Press it in on itself. And just for the sake of keeping things down here, I'm going to use a little bit of electrical tape to hold down the area that we just binded. Now it's time to grab our razor blade and cut around the circumference of this overlay. Here we go. Nice and slow. There's no need to rush this. Make sure that you're perpendicular to to the handle with your razor blade. Try not to tilt, you don't want to slant. All the way around. May be necessary to lean over to one side here. I like to do this just to make sure that I am going level. Now once you reach the core, meaning the steel handle, it will very quickly dull your blade. So I'd grab another one once you hit that core. Excuse me, the steel handle. I guess it is part of the core, but that steel will dull your razor blade very quickly, and I can feel it right now. So we are down to the steel, just about all the way around. And now to pop this off, I'm just gonna go in here like this. I can already tell my knife is just, my blade has become very dull. Grab a pair of pliers to assist us in removing this excess. There we go. We're going to actually take our lighter, pop this out of the clamp here for a moment. And that's pretty much what we're going for. There's always going to be a little bit of fraying when it comes to parachute cords, so I like to just lock everything in place. And there's what we were going for. A nice flat surface. So that way, when we create our handle, as you can see, our handle is going to be flat. Obviously it will be bigger than that. And that's all set, ready to go. The next step is going to be to prep the steel here. We need to strip off this tape that you see right here and just go over it with a file and just rough it up a little bit so that when we insert it into our wood, it will have something to grab onto. It won't be so slippery. Starting off by removing the tape here. Use the same method. So we've removed the tape, and now we want to rough this up with a file. To maximize the glue bonding to this steel rod, we're just roughing up the surface for the same reason that you would rough up a table or any piece of furniture that you're resurfacing. You scour off that smooth surface so that whatever you're applying to it sticks better. That looks good to me. Now the next step is to trim off the excess steel rod here. Now I've got my handle, or what will shortly be our handle, and holding it up to comparison, I think that the appropriate length of steel rod to be inserted into this wooden handle will be about 4 inches. So I've marked it here at 4 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this off right here where I marked it. So after cutting off that excess steel rod there, we're left with 4 inches here. That'll be ultimately inserted into our future handle here. And this thing is done. The whip itself is finished, except for the transition knot, which we'll tie at the very end. Now it's time to swing over here and start working on our handle. Using the measurements for my wooden cylinder here, my dowel rod, I've sketched out what I'd like my handle to roughly look like. So that's kind of what we're going for. Now, it's very important that before we start anything with the lathe, we get a measurement right here. We need to find the diameter of this part of the whip. As close as we can get this way, I'm going to take my caliper and just get this measurement in millimeters or inches, whatever you prefer. So it's 22 millimeters right here. And the reason we're doing that is because while we're creating our handle, while we're turning it and cutting down the size, we want to be intermittently taking measurements. And the end goal is to have this part of the handle that will be joined up with the whip. We want this part to also be 22 millimeters so that it's flush and smooth, and we can tie a nice transition knot on top of those. Now, before we put this thing in the lathe, we want to make sure that we find the center of both sides. That way it's not wobbling when the lathe is turning. Now, there are various ways to find the centers of dowel rods. This is a method I like to use. We'll just put it up against here so it can't slide. And we're just going to take a marker, put it about a millimeter or two away from what we believe the center to be. Hold the marker so it doesn't spin. And we will just turn the rod while holding the marker up against there. So that way we can find our center, which is right in the middle of this small circle. We'll do the same with the other side. And there we can see the center of the other side. So now we're ready to put this thing in the lathe. Now, different lathes have different parts, so they may vary. But this Craftsman lathe here, this is a 12-inch wood lathe, Sears Craftsman. This is how we'll put this on. This part of the lathe here, we're going to take this out. We're actually going to find the middle. This is what holds it. We're going to just pound this in with a rubber hammer as not to damage the part here. And make sure that the holding tool, it's very important that it goes in the very center. There we go. Now we're ready to put this in. So the dowel rod is in place, being held tightly by both ends. Like I said, different lathes may vary, so the method that I use to install this in place may vary if you are using a different lathe. So now it's time to start turning. Now it's very important that you use eye protection, thick eye protection. If you're not careful, the tools that we'll be using here, if you don't have a tight grip on them, sometimes what will happen is the turning piece of wood, it's not easy to do this, but it can happen. It'll bite like this and fling your tool, which is why it's not a great idea to have a window directly in front of your lathe. But I'm going to hold on very tightly to this. I think it won't be a problem, but use eye protection when you do this. There's a couple of tools that we'll be using for this handle. The first one is this, I don't know what it's called, but there it is. It's a spoon-shaped chisel. So you can see I have my sketch of the shape that I want for my handle, as well as the measurement that I need to be frequently measuring with my caliper. This is going to be the front of the whip, where the transition is, and this will be the heel. So this is the part that we really want to focus on and make sure that it's exactly 22 millimeters, and we don't want to go any less than 22 millimeters on the diameter. So that being said, I'm going to grab my spoon chisel. That's what I like to call it. I don't know if that's what it's actually supposed to be called, but let us get on with it. I'm actually going to turn this diagram sideways just so it's a little bit easier for me to read. So we can try to make this look like that. Off we go. Now what I'm doing right here is I'm just taking off that layer. I'm just trying to shrink this dowel rad down a little bit. Now keep in mind that this is going to make quite a mess, so it's going to require some cleanup afterwards, but it'll be well worth it. On this part right here right now, kind of just digging out this concave area. Pretty much have this how I like it. I'm just going to go ahead and just go over it lightly at this point. .26 millimeters. Got a little ways to go still. I'm going to put it back in and keep on turning. Definitely far from perfect, but that was kind of the look I was going for. We'll give one more measurement. Let's see how we're looking. And we are 22 millimeters. So now it's time to sand this down with some sandpaper. I'm actually going to take this outside into the garage and just sand down that end there and round it off. Go over the whole thing with some sandpaper. I'm taking a little bit of 220 sandpaper. You can use a coarser sandpaper if you'd like. I did not keep my, actually I never even sharpened my lathe tools. So if you notice, the handle looks very sloppy and it's tearing the wood instead of cutting the wood. If you're going to use a lathe, make sure that you have sharp tools, unlike me. I have dull tools, it's going to make it look worse like this and require more work sanding. So, just going to go over this just to make it look a little better than it does now, because right now it looks pretty bad. But I think with a little bit of time here, maybe about 10 more minutes of just standing out here in the nice sun, listening to the birds and the crickets of late summer, it'll look better. And no, I'm not going to make you watch all this. I've switched to some 600 sandpaper just to finish this handle off here as far as sanding goes. It's really making a difference. Some guys actually like to sand their handles or whatever they're turning while it's on the lathe. They'll just take that guide piece off. I've never really done that. Something about it just makes me a little bit nervous hanging onto that piece of wood while it's spinning in there. Maybe it's totally safe, but I just prefer to take it out and do it like this. Ooh, feels pretty good. Bowling pins, baseball bats, chess pieces even. These are all products of a lathe. I'm telling you guys, there's a lot of things that are made with lathes and nobody really knows. They're fun to use. I'm looking forward to using it more once I learn more about it. To be honest with you, this is actually the fourth handle that I've ever turned is right here, so definitely has its weak points, but I think it'll be suitable for this whip. There we have it. Now it's time to drill a hole for our whip. At the end, we'll also drill a hole on the other side and add some counterweight. So this is basically what the whip's going to look like. Next step is to drill a hole straight down through this dowel rod. So we're going to put this vertically in the vise, grab a drill and a bit, and drill. For our 1/4 inch steel rod, I'm actually going to be using 5/16 for our bit size. The reason I'm doing that is because I want the hole to be a little bit bigger so that there's room for the glue to form a layer in between the inside of this wood and on the surface of this 1/4 inch steel rod, just so it holds a little better. So 5/16 on the drill bit. Now I'm going to wrap this with some cloth to protect it and put it in this vise. I recommend for drilling this hole that you do little bits at a time, maybe in 1 inch increments. That way you can pull your drill bit out and clean off the sawdust so it cuts better every time you go back. See that? All this buildup here, what it'll actually do is keep it from cutting the wood, and you'll just end up heating it up and causing smoke. Make sure we're straight up and down. Clear that off. Alright, let's see how we did. Alright. This is one of my favorite parts of making wooden handle whips. You're just test fitting everything. See how it's nice and loose like that? That's good. Because our glue is going to have some room to do what it does. Because you can really see and feel what the whip is going to be like. So now what we're going to do is go to the other side and we're going to drill another hole, because as it is now, this is a very nose heavy whip and I like something that's a little more balanced. Taken this bolt and I've cut it to the length that this hole is for our counterweight, and I thought that this would be kind of a nice look for the heel of the whip. I'm actually going to also countersink this a little bit. If you're not familiar with that, it's causing kind of a cone, upside down cone shape to a hole that you pre-drill to accommodate for wider bases like this nut that you see here. There we are. So I'm going to add a little bit of wood glue, some premium wood glue, water resistant, interior, exterior. Stuff's pretty good. I'm going to drip some down there and that will be used to hold this thing in place. Realistically, we're actually going to be threading it into the wood, so there's probably a very slim chance of it coming out anyway. But I like to be on the safe side and do it anyway. Down the hatch. Should do it. And we'll thread it in by just twisting the handle. Figured we'll go vertical here for the last half inch or so. There it is. Definitely not crazy about the way that that turned out, but it's going to give us some good counterweight, and that's what's important here. Now this next step is obviously optional, but if you've made it this far, why not go the extra step and make it look a little bit better? I'm using here this is some red oak stain. Red Oak 215. I think this color will go very well and complement that maroon that we have on our whip itself. Just going to stir this up a little bit. I may give this one coat, maybe two. We'll see how it turns out. This is fun. I like this part. Ah, nice rich color. I'm not laying it on really thick. I'm just trying to seal it off and get it in all the little crevices. And just get in between this mess here, the heel. Ugh. I really don't like the way that turned out, but I probably would have just rather cut that off and then just grind it down a little bit. Wear gloves when you do this too. I forgot to put some on. It's going to be hard to get this off. So this is just kind of a fun little optional step. I don't know why, actually not thinking about it, that anybody would want to leave an unfinished handle on a whip. But, you know, that's your thing. Skip the stain. I like it. Looks good. Now we're going to let this dry for a while, and I will be back. So our stain has dried and it's all ready to go, but I want to add one last layer of something. This is some Minwax fast drying polyurethane clear satin spray. This stuff is just going to give it a nice sheen. Let's take it outside and spray it. I'm not going to get crazy with this because I don't necessarily have the time to wait long periods of time for drying, so just enough to make it pop. We'll let this dry for about 30 minutes to an hour. So there's our handle. It's still just a touch tacky. I'm going to go ahead and move on. It's time to attach the handle to the whip. So once again, I'm going to wrap this in some cloth and put it in the vise. Pour in some glue, and away we'll go. Wood glue going in. That should do it. Now when we put the whip in, some of the glue will be forced back out, so don't worry about that. There we go, you see that happening there? Not a problem. I'm just going to grab another rag. It just means I put in a little bit too much glue. So the last step that we're going to be able to do tonight is going to be to wrap this with a bunch of tape. That's going to hold it so the glue can set. Give it some tape, and this tape is going to hold it. The two pieces joined together and give it an opportunity to set. Nice and tight. We're going to let this set overnight. Alright, so it's been just about 24 hours. I'm just taking off the last piece of tape that we used to hold everything together while the glue set. Feels pretty good. I'm not actually going to crack this whip for a while still. Maybe give it another 10 hours or so, but I think we're safe to go ahead and tie on a transition Turk's head knot here. We'll do that by cutting a strip of 5-ounce cowhide and attach it, and we'll continue from there. So here's a piece of 5-ounce cowhide that we're going to use, and we're just going to tie this on like we would for any other transition knot foundation. Half of it will be over the braided portion, and the other half on top here will be covering the handle. And we're just going to bind this on with some artificial sinew. Make sure that that's straight. There we are. That out of my way. And I'm just going to cover this entire foundation with this artificial sinew because it is a very light leather, and if there are any tiny spaces in my knot and it's not perfect, you'll be able to see the bright leather shining through, especially when bright light hits it. This doesn't have to be really tight. Take a look at it, make sure the underside is good, and it is. There we are. Now we're going to tie a 2-pass 5x4 Turk's head knot. I've threaded into my needle a 4-foot section of pure brown parachute cord. I think that will blend the handle into the thong nicely. tie a simple 5x4 Turk's head knot. We're going to start it just to the left of the actual foundation, so I think it's easier to do it that way. Hey Tipper, what are you doing? I wish she would clean up this mess. She won't. Kind of skimming through this knot here. I'm not really making a lot of comments on what I'm doing, simply because I have another video on this knot. And it is in the description if you would like to see a detailed video on how to tie this knot. Under, over, under. Alright, pass number 1 is complete. Almost. Get the next pass started, and then we'll slide the knot to where it's actually going to be. Right there. Help lift it over there. Okay. Ooh, man, I'm excited. This is going to look sharp, I think. Yeah, keep your tools sharp. Keep your tools sharp. I honestly don't know how to sharpen lathe tools. After putting in after putting in a few more minutes of sanding than I should have had to, the handle didn't turn out bad. I'm happy with it. Now we're just kind of tightening up this first pass a little bit so it's not too loose. We don't want to make it too tight. Almost. There we go. There's the first pass. Push these together just a little bit. There we are. Okay, let's start the second pass here. Now waxing this whip is definitely going to be a little bit of a challenge because I'm not so sure that it's a good idea to submerge a wooden handle, especially that's been finished with varnish and polyurethane. I don't know if it's okay to submerge it in hot wax. I would think not, but I don't know the answer to that. So what I usually do, what I did on the other whips that I made with wooden handles, which have been 2, is, well, handles that I had made. For other whips I purchased handles from people, but what I like to do is submerge the whip into the wax about up to here and just turn it just so I don't touch the wood with the hot wax, and that worked pretty well for the other whip. The other few whips that I did. Here we are. And if you make wooden handled bullwhips, you don't have to tie a heel knot. If you're going for this particular look, I'm sure there are some whips out there with wooden handles that have heel knots that might look interesting. Later, I'm probably going to experiment when I have some more time. I want to do some experimenting with wooden handles where I kind of do one of these, but I plate over this, do like a square start, and have like diamond plaid here, maybe another color here. I think that would look kind of neat. Not covering up the wood too much, otherwise it'd be kind of pointless, but I think that might be an interesting thing to do. Okay. if you're wanting to get into some exotic woods for your lathe projects, check out this website right here. I just learned about them probably 3 days ago, and they've got some really cool wood. Some of it's a little pricey, but it's to be expected, I think. But there is some beautiful wood that I can imagine if you turned it and gave it a nice layer of shellac or varnish or whatever, man, it would look beautiful. So check them out. If you're doing any projects, small projects like knife handles or anything of that effect, I think that's a very great place to buy some pieces of wood. And they're not paying me to say that either. I think they're great. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I think brown was a good choice for the knot. I think it looks good. Handle is still a little bit tacky. Didn't let it dry as long as I should have. It'll be okay. Okay. Gave these two last strands a nice tug, and we're going to snip them and singe them. Give this knot a little roll. Tie on a cracker. And this project will be finished. There we go. We're going to get a quick reading on our wax here before we wax our whip. We're looking at about 214 degrees. Start off by just dipping the whip in the wax like we would any other whip. Right up to that handle. Just close to it. And I like to just take this and just bathe it right up to that handle. We'll turn it in a second here. A little bit of wax is getting on that wood. I think it'll be a problem though. Turn it over, get this side. That sit for a moment. Alright, it's been about 3 minutes. We'll take it out. As soon as we take the whip out of the wax, I like to just remove that coating just so it's not drying and then we're having an excessive amount of wax on the whip. So we're just going to remove that so it doesn't flake. Cover this up, dip it in there again. All the way down. Get the fall. We'll just hang it up here to dry, to cool. There it is, guys, a complete wooden handled bullwhip. I've allowed this whip some time to cool from the wax. I've also attached a nylon cracker on the end, so this thing is ready to go. I hope that you all were inspired by this video and learned something new, and maybe even are ready to go buy a lathe of your own and practice making some wooden handles for your future whips. As always, I want to give a special thank you to April Throgmorton and all of my other supporters over at patreon.com. It's because of all you guys that this video and all the rest of them are possible, and I thank you very much for that. Please do remember to hit the subscribe button if you like what you see, because there are a lot of videos just like this one on the way. I think it's time to take this thing out and test crack it. See you in the next one, guys.